A new car rolls out of the factory every 60 seconds, not every hour, not every 10 minutes, every single minute. While most people are still finishing a thought, another Toyota is already moving toward a life on the road inside Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky. It doesn't feel like a typical factory. It feels closer to something alive, something that never stops, never hesitates, never wastes a single movement. But the strange part isn't the speed. It's what that speed is being used for. Because while the world has been watching, electric car headlines dominated by Tesla and BYD, something very different has been quietly taking shape here. And at first, it doesn't look like a revolution. It looks like perfection. Long corridors of machines move in silence. Robotic arms don't rush, they don't pause, they simply execute. Metal becomes structure, structure becomes shape, and shape becomes a finished vehicle in a rhythm so precise it almost feels impossible. More than 2,000 cars leave this place every day, each one built under the same invisible rule: nothing is wasted. But that's where the first strange detail appears. Nothing is stored either. Parts don't sit around waiting. They arrive exactly when needed, as if the factory is predicting its own future. If a part is late by even a small margin, the entire rhythm feels it, and yet nothing breaks. That system has a name inside Toyota. Not a machine, not a robot, but an idea. Lean manufacturing. Everything unnecessary is removed until only what matters remains. Then there is Kaizen, another idea that sounds simple until you see what it does in reality. Every day, every worker is expected to find one small improvement, not a big breakthrough, not a dramatic invention. Just one small correction that makes the system slightly better than yesterday. That's where the uncomfortable truth begins to form. This factory isn't trying to be fast, it's trying to never stop getting better. And then there is the third layer: just-in-time production. Parts don't arrive early. They don't wait. They appear exactly when the factory needs them. It sounds fragile, almost risky. But inside Toyota, it creates something almost unnatural: flow, continuous, uninterrupted flow. Still, none of this explains what it feels like to stand inside it, because even with all this structure, the real surprise is how human it all is. More than 8,000 people work here, not hidden behind machines, but standing beside them, watching, adjusting, listening. Some paint, some assemble, some test. And each one carries responsibility for a system that never sleeps. But what's different here is not just the work kits, how they are treated. No one is thrown in front of machines on day one. New workers don't start with pressure. They start with understanding, safety, training, repetition. Toyota doesn't treat workers like parts of the machine. It treats them like the ones who keep the machine alive. And somewhere in that philosophy, a strange advantage begins to appear. Workers are encouraged to speak, to question, to suggest. If something can be done better or safer, it is not ignored. It is tested, sometimes even implemented immediately. That system is called Kaizen again, but here it feels different because it's not just an idea on paper. It's happening in real time every day, across thousands of people, which leads to a quiet contradiction. How does a company this focused on stability, tradition, and precision suddenly find itself in the middle of the biggest technological race in the world? Because outside these walls, the story of the auto industry has changed. Tesla pushed the idea of fully electric, fully digital, fully autonomous vehicles. BYD scaled electric production at massive speed. The world started believing that the future belonged only to those who moved fastest. Toyota didn't move the same way. It stayed with hybrids. It stayed with balance. It stayed with caution. And for a while, that looked like hesitation. But inside this factory, something else was already happening. New sections were quietly being redesigned. Assembly lines were being adjusted, not removed, not replaced, but expanded. Built to handle something new, something electric, something that didn't fully exist here yet, but was already being prepared for. And this is where the story starts to shift. Because the most important part of a modern electric vehicle is not the design, not the software, not even the brand. It is the battery, and Toyota knows this better than almost anyone. Inside the same ecosystem that builds Camrys are AV4 hybrids and Lexus ES models. A new focus begins to appear. Battery systems, testing units, prototype energy modules. At first, It is small, almost invisible compared to full vehicle production, but it grows. Lithium-ion systems are tested. Nickel-metal hybrids are refined. And then something even more ambitious enters the conversation: solid-state batteries. At first, it sounds like future talk, something distant, something experimental. But inside Toyota, it is treated differently. Not as an idea, as a direction, because solid-state batteries promise something current EV systems still struggle with: faster charging, higher safety, longer life. On paper, it sounds like an upgrade. In reality, it could change the entire competition. But there is a catch. Nothing about solid-state is easy. It is unstable, expensive, difficult to scale, and many companies are still trying to figure it out. Which raises a silent question inside this factory. What happens if Toyota gets it right? Because if Toyota controls its own battery production inside its own factory, something important changes. It stops depending on outside supply chains. It stops waiting. It starts controlling the most critical part of the EV future. And that is where the tension begins to rise. The same factory that once built hybrid leaders now quietly becomes a testing ground for what could come next. EV platforms are being prepared to coexist with petrol and hybrid systems, not replacing them overnight, but merging into them slowly, almost carefully. But not everyone sees that as strength. Outside, observers call it slow, conservative. Late, meanwhile, Tesla moves faster. BYD expands aggressively. But inside Toyota, speed is not the only measure. Reliability is durability. Trust is, and those values show up in something very simple. Every car that leaves this factory goes through the same final process. It doesn't matter where it will be sold. It is tested the same way. Software checks every system: engine, brakes, sensors, battery, lights. Then the car is physically driven under pressure, high speed, sharp turns, braking tests, real conditions that simulate the worst a driver might face. Only after that does it leave no shortcuts, no exceptions. And still, even that doesn't feel like the final point of the story, because the real question isn't what Toyota is building today. It's what this factory is being turned into, a place that once perfected hybrid vehicles is now preparing for electric ones, a place that once followed the market is now trying to shape its next direction, and a place that once moved cautiously is now experimenting with technology that could redefine everything it stands for, which leads to something uncomfortable. If Toyota succeeds in building strong, safe, scalable, solid-state batteries inside this system, the race everyone is watching might not just get closer. It might reset completely, because then the question is no longer whether Toyota is late or early. It becomes something harder to answer. What if Toyota was never trying to win the same race at all? And what if the real shift hasn't even happened yet, despite the fact that every 60 seconds, another piece of that future is already rolling out of this factory, quietly joining the roads, and blending into a world that thinks it already understands who is leading it? Because once you start looking at this factory differently, even the normal things begin to feel like signals. The Camry rolling off the line isn't just another sedan. It's part of a system that has been refined for decades, tuned so precisely that even a tiny improvement in assembly time or fuel efficiency ripples across millions of vehicles. The RAV4 hybrid isn't just an SUV. Either it's a bridge between two eras, where combustion and electric power are forced to cooperate instead of compete. And the Lexus ES, sitting at the top of the line, quietly represents something else entirely: Toyota's attempt to prove that reliability and luxury don't have to be opposites. But the deeper story isn't in the cars people already know. It's in what the factory is slowly preparing to build next. There's a part of the plant that doesn't draw much attention at first. No dramatic announcements, no flashy branding, just sections being quietly reorganized, almost like a building being mentally rewritten while it's still in use. Assembly lines are adjusted not to speed up what exists, but to make space for what doesn't fully exist yet. Electric systems, battery integration zones, new testing corridors that don't quite match the old layout. And the strange thing is, nobody inside treats it like a revolution. They treat it like evolution, a controlled transition, something that must be done carefully enough that nothing else breaks in the process. But that caution hides a bigger tension, Because outside these walls, the industry is not moving carefully. It's accelerating. Tesla is pushing software-driven vehicles that feel more like computers on wheels. BYD is scaling production at a speed that makes traditional automakers uncomfortable. The narrative everywhere else is simple: move faster or get left behind. And Toyota, for years, looked like it was choosing the second option. Until you realize something uncomfortable about this factory, it never actually stopped moving forward. It just stopped announcing it. Inside the battery development sections, testing becomes more intense.